It was a quiet evening, save the howling of the wolves and the whistling of the leaves. The moonlight through the small window to my room cast big spooky shadows. I was terrified and pulled the blanket over my face. As if the night was not already scary enough, something began to tick in the dark. What is that? I thought to myself. Could it be a ghost? I shrugged at the thought. I was startled by a knock at the door. My heart was now beating substantially fast. It was as if any time it would jump and fly out of my chest. "George, open, it is me." A voice whispered. It was none other than Pernilla, my elder sister. I heaved a sigh. I felt the tension reducing and my shoulders sagging. At least it was not a ghost, I thought. "Are you awake?" she asked, still in a whisper. "Yeah, I am," I replied quite feebly. The doorknob turned, and she emerged in her white nightgown and hastily moved and sat on my bed. "Have you noticed there was a sudden ticking in the house?" she inquired, tickling like of an old grandfather clock. I thought the ticking was in my head. I rubbed my chin, perplexed. Before my words could even fade from the air, the ticking was back, only this time stronger. "There it is again," she whispered. "I have noticed." I stammered. "What could it be?" I asked. "I don't know," she replied. "It's coming from Grandpa's bedroom," she surmised. "Let's go check it out together." "I don't think." "Come on." Pernilla reached for my hand and beamed her flashlight. The power had gone off after dinner and hadn't returned. She led me downstairs and into Grandpa's bedroom. I wondered where she was getting the courage. "I wish Mom and Dad were here," I mumbled. Mom and Dad had left for a one-week trip to Kenya and had left Pernilla in charge. "Quiet," Pernilla muttered. She opened the door and illuminated the room. Grandpa's portrait was still hanging on the wall. Just as he left it before he suffered a fatal stroke. It gave me the creeps remembering it happened in the very room. The ticking came from the old wardrobe he had brought from England. With firmness, Pernilla thrust the door open. The ticking seemed to be coming from under a pile of clothes in the dark corner. Pernilla moved them aside and laying there was a glowing golden clock. It was very beautiful. "My God," I exclaimed. My mouth agape. "Let's check it out," said Pernilla. She lifted it and put it on the bed for scrutiny. "How long do you think it has been there?" I queried. "I say this clock has been there for a very long time," she said. Mother had preferred to leave Grandpa's room just the way it was. I figured she was still gathering the courage to face the fact that he was gone. "But why has it been quiet all this time?" "That I don't know," she said, feeling the curvings on it. "Do you suppose it's Grandpa's?" "No. How could you even think that?" Pernilla interrupted, knowing where I was heading. She snorted. "We talked about this. Ghosts don't exist, so don't even think about bringing that topic up." She sputtered. She then got back to the clock. I mumbled words in my breath out of discontent. "It has an inscription behind it," said Pernilla. "What does it say?" I asked, enthusiastically. "It says that whoever turns this red thing up here," she touched a kind of knob, "will see the wonders of the world." She completed reading the inscription. "I definitely wouldn't want to find out what it means," I said. "I am going back to bed." Before I could get on my feet from the kneeling, Pernilla turned the knob and, swash, everything turned to blur. We couldn't see anything, our heads spinning so fast I felt myself passing out. I was out for a while, and on opening my eyes, we were laying on thick tall brown grass. I heard howling and hooting, not from animals but from people. Pernilla was still out, her hair covering her face. "Pernilla, wake up." I shook her up. She sat and rubbed her eyes with her arm. "What is this place?" Pernilla asked, perplexed. Men with painted faces dressed in animal skins appeared from the thick tall brown grass. They rounded us up and led us bounded in vines to a village nearby. The entrance was guarded by lions that were so big and fierce. I could swear they had human expressions. "Oh, what do we have here?" the chief who came to meet us said. It was then that was realized that we could understand everything they said, though we were pretty sure it wasn't English. The clock had somehow warped our reality. Pernilla looked at me with dread. I could see the golden clock glowing in the pockets of her gown. I wondered why our captors couldn't see it. I presumed maybe its magic made it only visible to us. The 3 days that followed were unlike anything I had ever seen. After a rough start, being bounded like for 2 days straight, and having to do all your business like that was hell. Our captors had the decency of taking us to their toilets, well more of a long trench covered by logs and leaves. The stench was awful. I can't take this anymore. Pernilla cried. I looked at her over the papa I had helped myself onto. I had already freaked for 12 hours and had burnt out. Pernilla, who had been a little more composed, was now where I was. How tables had turned, huh? Shall we find our way home? I asked after Pernilla had cooled. I had spent like an hour seeing her tossing things around our jail. It was a dark cave with only a torch with a very wake flame for light. The guards seemed to enjoy our suffering. I don't know, she said helplessly. I'm sorry I brought all this on you. If I didn't turn that knob, we wouldn't be here. I resisted the urge to say, you are damn right, it's your fault. I stayed quiet. Then the chief, whom we hadn't seen for a while, suddenly appeared. He was a short, bulky man. His most distinguishable feature was his knotted beard and his cap made of straw painted red. Bring them to my court, he ordered the 2 guards on his side. These were tall, muscular, dark-skinned men, with skins covering their lower parts up to the knees. Their huge chest was open. They wore black sandals also made from animal skin. The 2 guards picked us up and led us to his court. We stood in the chief's quarters, which was a fairly big place. It had torches going in the mouth of animal sculptures. His throne was decorated with feathers that I guessed were got from an ostrich. I'm going to ask you one more time, why are you here? The chief boomed. He had posed the same question to us over and over again, and every time we kept giving unsatisfactory answers, so he could send us back to our torment. I couldn't imagine this being any different. So I decided to take the lead this time around. Pernilla had her time. After all, she was even too drained to speak. I narrated the whole story, from me waking up to Pernilla turning the clock knob. Throughout the story, the chief kept humming and nodding. What did you say was your name? He asked. George Wallace. And that's my sister Pernilla Wallace. I knew someone of the name Wallace. Peter Wallace to be precise, he said. Pernilla and I exchanged glances. Peter Wallace was the name of Grandpa. He visited us not so long ago, a boy about your age. He gestured towards Pernilla. To come to think of it, you 2 look like him, more like you. He gestured again towards Pernilla. People had said if Pernilla was a boy, she'd have been the replica of Grandpa. But it was impossible. Grandpa was very many years old, and the chief had called him a boy. After that, we were treated like royalty. We were given comfortable rooms. Despite the use of rudimentary materials, it was pretty much the same as any modern room. They had wardrobes, tables, chairs, a king-size bed, floor carpet, door, and lock. Everything. We also learned that it didn't just stop with their bedrooms, it went on and on. They had schools where the young were taught about many things, including construction, housework, reading, and counting. They had games that resembled football and netball. They held festivals to showcase fashion, and to award those who had contributed a lot to society. They had a writing language, a calendar, everything. These weren't savages, this was a civilized society. It turns out Grandpa had come to this place in similar conditions, and he was to thank for the games, but other than that, this place was already on the path to modern civility. What happened? This question lingered in our minds. We grew up knowing that the Western world is what brought civilization to Africa. It took a magic clock for us to see and understand this. On the 3rd day after I joined the men for the hunt and Pernilla joined the women in the fields. I was able to kill a boar, but after getting like a million thorn pricks. You're a natural, the leader of the hunt had said. Thanks, I replied whilst groaning in pain. A party member plucked some leaves and told me to chew. Within a couple of minutes the pains had subsided. Another put a kind of sap on the pricks. He said it was some sort of antiseptic. I was impressed. These people had medicine that worked. In the modern world we insult herbalists, perhaps because the art may have been lost over time, but who was to blame? Well, let me leave that for you to answer. We had a hearty dinner with the chief and his family. He had 2 wives, 10 beautiful daughters, and 6 sons. He had a very huge table to accommodate his huge family and any guests he got. The dinner table was too long, you would have to shout to be heard. When we were about to finish our dinner, he stood up and said, "Our 2 friends are about to leave. We have always prided ourselves on having the best hospitality and the worst prisons. He laughed softly. The whole room laughed along, all except Pernilla and I. We forced a smile though. Pernilla stood up and thanked the chief for his hospitality, and before she could go back to sit, the golden clock started to shine. It shone so brightly that everyone had to put their arms over their eyes. "Goodbye, our white friends," he said. And everything went dark. My head spun so fast and I could feel myself passing out once more. When we woke, we were sprawled on the floor of Grandpa's room. We looked at each other in silence. We were all thinking the same thing. What had just happened? Our adventures had just begun. With our newfound golden clock, we traveled across time and interacted with hundreds of ancient cultures.